In 1991, Hiroyuki Takahashi, an Enix staff member who worked on the Dragon Quest series, started a partnership with Sega and established Sonic Software Planning, inheriting the name of the company's mascot and going on to make literally not a single Sonic game. But his team did start the Shining series, focusing entirely on it during their lifetime and collaborating with Camelot Software Planning, a studio formed in 1994 by Hiroyuki's brother Shugo Takahashi. In 1998, Sonic was shut down and merged with another of Sega's subsidiaries, while Hiroyuki joined his brother's company as president. Nowadays, Camelot is still led by the two brothers, perpetually stuck in a treadmill of Mario sports games. Their brainchild is no longer in their hands, nor does it resemble its old face. But amidst the ups and downs, Camelot created something else that resonated with people at the time, a shining beacon for Nintendo's Game Boy Advance. Golden Sun and its sequel, The Lost Age, is a pair of games that I look back on with fond memories. I first played them during the system's heyday, and parts of it have always stuck with me. The soundtrack is amazing, the quest mechanics are interesting, and its colorful fantasy world is very charming. But it's also a pair of games that I usually end up giving up on whenever I try to play through them again. There has to be a reason for that, right? The story begins with Isaac, the protagonist, still a kid. Mount Aleph is erupting, and it threatens to destroy your hometown of Vale. While the healers are busy holding back a giant boulder, your mother tells you to escape to the plaza down the hill. Should be easy enough, it's just down the stairs. Oh. After meeting your buddy Garrett and taking a detour around the village, you see your parents, as well as your friend Jenna and her family. Jenna's brother Felix fell into the river, and nobody can get near and give him a hand, so you head down to the plaza in search of assistance. You bring back someone with enough magic juice to help, but it's already too late. The healers can't hold back the boulder any longer, and it begins rolling down the hills before smashing straight into where Felix and the others are, presumably killing them instantly. It gets worse as you set off once again in search of more help. Garrett follows, and the two of you end up hearing things you shouldn't have. A pair of shady characters notice you and attack, leaving you and Garrett injured as the rain continues pouring. 3 years have passed since the tragedy of Mount Aleph, and Isaac and his friends have been hard at work studying the magical force known as Synergy. Today you are meeting with Kraden, a scholar who promised to take you to Soul Sanctum for a study trip. On the way there, however, you stumble onto the two goons who slammed you 3 years ago. They still haven't given up on discovering the secrets hidden in the mountain, and have been pestering Kraden to help them enter the depths. But good for them, we have a trio of curious youngsters ready to pillage an ancient patrimony, so they let you through. After meeting with the old scholar, the group sneaks into Soul Sanctum, and after solving a series of puzzles, they find themselves in the very deepest area. Here lie the elemental stars, housing the power of the 4 elements and keeping the ancient powers of alchemy at bay. Kraden asks you to go collect the stars for whatever reason, and so you do. But after collecting the first 3, you notice that the goons have appeared once more, taking Kraden and Jenna hostage and demanding that you collect the remaining star and give it to their accomplice, Alex. They also force their other accomplice to take off their mask, revealing none other than Felix, Jenna's brother who everyone thought was dead. With no other choice, you collect the last star, which triggers Mount Aleph to erupt once again and release the power locked within. The goons escape with Kraden and Jenna, leaving you and Garrett trapped inside. That is, until the Wise One, a floating rock with godly powers, appears and explains that the powers of the elements have been unleashed, and that the world will end if it's not stopped. It then teleports you outside of Soul Sanctum, where you meet up with the rest of the villagers. Inside the shrine, the Great Healer transmits a message from the Wise One, saying that stopping the elemental lighthouses from being lit is Isaac and Garrett's responsibility alone. And so you set off on a long journey, holding the last of the elemental stars and hoping to prevent the lighthouses from being lit, lest the world itself be destroyed. Now, the thing is, Golden Sun ends on a cliffhanger, and there's a reason for that. The story was originally meant to fit in a single game, but apparently it became too big for one cartridge, so Camelot had to slice it in 2. Cue Golden Sun: The Lost Age. This time, Felix takes the role of protagonist as you see the plot evolve through his eyes. And for better or for worse, switching the lead characters to the group that was previously positioned as the antagonists certainly has interesting implications. At the end of the first game, Isaac's party reaches the top of the Venus Lighthouse, where they face off against Saturos and Menardi. However, the lighthouse is lit and its power goes bonkers, making the ground shake horribly and causing Felix and a girl called Sheba to fall to their apparent deaths. Meanwhile, Jenna and Kraden escape and head to the meeting point indicated by Alex, when suddenly the small landmass is torn from the continent and they find themselves stranded as they begin drifting through the ocean. The good news is that Felix and Sheba survived and got dragged by the waves into that same landmass. The bad news is that the earthquake has led to a massive tsunami heading straight for them. But of course they'll be fine. In fact, the tsunami sent their cute little island straight into a continent, which they are now free to explore. Isaac's party doesn't show up until late, but in the meantime, they're sailing out into the sea in search of ancient Lemuria, the last remnant of old civilization. You learn about it from a dingus called Bobby, who has been trying to find its location since many years ago. However, its location is obscured by supernatural forces, and Isaac's party swears to find it. You do actually get to visit Lemuria after an excruciatingly long quest, answering a bunch of questions regarding the backstory. Golden Sun takes place in Weyard, a fantasy land of swords and beasts, of talking trees and werewolves, and where the edge of the world drops like a waterfall. You win this one, Flat Earthers. Weyard is also a land where a magical force called Synergy exists in select locations. But it wasn't always like this. Long ago, the power of alchemy was present throughout the entire world, leading to widespread synergy usage and many thriving civilizations. However, some used that power to fulfill their own petty ambitions and drag the world into ruinous conflict. So alchemy was forcibly sealed away by utilizing 4 lighthouses and their respective elemental stars: Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury. For generations, the people of Vale have been guarding the stars, housed deep in Sol Sanctum, a temple built into Mount Aleph. But thanks to our heroes over here, that power has slowly been returning to Weyard, causing synergy to start appearing all over. Synergy is divided into the 4 elements that make up all matter: earth, fire, wind, and water. These manifest in many different ways, forming a symbiotic relationship. And one of the world building's most compelling points is how deeply integrated it is into everything. The question that looms over the entire plot is whether activating the lighthouses is the correct thing to do. Sure, alchemy was sealed away because idiots decided to be idiots. But it's not all just magic spells that set things on fire. Synergy can be used as a daily driver for mundane tasks such as moving objects or treating illness or blowing things up. The power of the elements is what gives life to different locations, like the healing waters of the Mercury Lighthouse returning to the fountain when it's lit, or how a seafaring village was forced to turn to piracy because the fish were dying and their land is unsuitable for raising crops. Synergy also plays a direct role in gameplay, since it's integrated into both combat and exploration. In battle, it functions as magic spells with offensive and defensive effects, while outside of battle, it serves as tools to overcome obstacles. Progressing through dungeons frequently demands synergy to do things like freeze puddles of water or move objects from a distance. I just moved shit with my freaking mind, haha! This integration of story and gameplay incentivizes players to dig around with their powers. It's the kind of world that makes the player fall in love with it and actively engage with every nook and cranny, discovering secrets that go from the classic goodies placed on barrels to underground caves housing treasure chests and creatures called Jinn. A special mention to Mind Read, which helps with world building and complements exploration by sometimes providing hints about hidden secrets. And it's all completely optional. The player only has to engage with it if they want to. It's also plastered with Camelot's usual cues, such as the emojis and the ever-present pre-rendered graphics that made the game a visual feast back in 2002. All the effects, all the particles, all the GBA crapping itself trying to render all this. Sure, blowing it up to a big modern screen doesn't do it any favors, especially not on the world map. But you have to remember, this was built for a tiny, outdated LCD screen plagued with shoddy response rates. That's not a bug, that's a feature. Aside from the larger bosses that are too obvious even on a small screen, the only sore point with the presentation is that the camera scrolling isn't as smooth as it should be. It's a bit jerky when you start running or when you move diagonally. The soundtrack is also a highlight. Motoi Sakuraba might be most famous for his work on Dark Souls and the Tales series, but this might just be my favorite work of his. He's always done an excellent job at combining strong melodies and dingy-quinky instrumentation to signify wonder and mystery, and that is in full display here. It's also notable for being one of the cleanest sounding GBA games out there. Many developers continued struggling with it for years, yet Camelot managed to get the most out of the audio on their first try, very early in the system's lifetime. Anyway, it's time to discuss some questionable elements of the story. But due to the fact that I'm technically covering two separate games that form one big story, spoilers are basically unavoidable. So here's your warning. Skip to the timestamp on screen to avoid them. I think the biggest issue I have with Golden Sun's story isn't the overarching plot, but how it's presented. I've heard that in some industries, writers are paid by the number of words they write. If that's true for Camelot, then I hope Takahashi enjoyed his bonus. The script is laced with repetition and unnecessary verbosity. This is especially true in The Lost Age, which, as I've realized, is the entire reason why replaying Golden Sun seems so insurmountable. Yet despite that, when it comes to certain important details of the story, you're hit with the same old "you don't need to know," or "it's too soon for you to know," or "it's too complicated for you." It's infuriatingly condescending. This is especially bad with Alex, who unsurprisingly turns out to be a power-hungry dingus. The only development he gets is right at the very end when the Wise One puts him in the dirt. And whatever other ambitions he has won't be explored further since the series died with Dark Dawn. And that also ended on a cliffhanger, because of course it did. I've seen the story being described as being made up as it goes. And again, when you add Lost Age into the conversation, that doesn't sound so far-fetched. Several foundational scenes are seemingly tied together with superglue, and while the first game has a lot of moments where apparent plot holes or oddities are casually hand-waved away, you tolerate it because it's only the first half of the story, and the second half will explain all of it, right? Right? For example, right at the start, you have a 3-year time skip coinciding exactly with the moment where Saturos and Menardi decide to visit the Soul Sanctum again. It's quite strange that only 3 years later did they attempt it again, since it's revealed near the end of The Lost Age that they were in a hurry. Regardless, the reason is that they are part of the Fire Clan and come from the village of Prox, which is currently facing a destructive snowstorm that threatens to destroy everything. To stop it, they need to turn on the Mars Lighthouse, so it can serve as a space heater, which is the very last dungeon and the only lighthouse that still hasn't been lit at that point. This is all well and good as a plot point, but it's presented in a very one-sided manner. There's no reason to believe that Saturos and Menardi are anything but evil, or that they have a legitimate reason why they want to activate the lighthouses. Every last second of their screen time shows them being massive jackasses and causing problems. It's mentioned by Prox villagers that they went to Vale 3 years ago on a peaceful mission, which is strange because they snuck into Soul Sanctum, caused a massive shitstorm that killed most of their group and left the entire village in ruins, and then also kidnapped a couple of people. We'll get to that in a hot minute. Another major plot point connected to Saturos and Menardi's mission is that Weyard is dying. Visiting Lemuria reveals to the player that the continents used to be much bigger, but have slowly been eroded over time. This leads to a pretty interesting conundrum, as Isaac puts it. wait for the world to end, or trigger it ourselves. If the White Houses remain unlit, the power of the elements that give life to everything will continue to wither away until nothing can survive. If the White Houses are lit, mankind itself will lead the world to ruin by abusing the power of alchemy for its own petty ambitions. Unfortunately, the game doesn't do a great job at conveying this dichotomy, and in fact, it's very easy to believe that the Wise One was correct when it said that alchemy is dangerous and shouldn't be screwed with. Messing with the elemental stars was what caused the funny boulder at the start when Sol Sanctum went bananas, and lighting the Venus Lighthouse made it split and cause a massive earthquake that cracked the continent and led to a massive tsunami that wrecked the entire villages. And when the final lighthouse is lit, Vale and Mount Aleph get swallowed into the earth. And the only reason its entire population doesn't go along with them is that the Wise One gave them a warning to evacuate beforehand. Damn, the floating rock was right all along. There is one case of it improving things, which is in Emil when the waters of the healing fountain return and save the town. But it's never actually brought up as a counter-argument, nor does the party stop to think that maybe lighting the Mercury Lighthouse wasn't all bad. Lemuria is the main argument in favor of returning alchemy to the world, since it has long lost its old luster. However, this stagnation is just as likely to have come from its citizens falling to hedonism, since Lemuria supposedly has no sickness and conflict. And then Pierce learns that his mother died from sickness, but anyway. All of this to say that it's bizarre how Isaac's party easily accepts the idea of lighting the lighthouses after Felix's group rescues them. It's extra bizarre because if you go back to Isaac and talk to him while he's trashed on the floor, he protests and asks why Felix is helping the bad guys. You never see Isaac's party having a realization that maybe Felix does have a good reason behind his actions, and when the two parties join up late game, it's just waved away with Isaac trusting Felix's judgment. Don't ask questions, Isaac, just trust the alchemy. The reason why they didn't try to talk about it first is because Felix wanted to take the role of villain and carry the burden all by himself, which fair enough. But also because Kraden apparently believed that Isaac wouldn't dare break the sacred teachings of Vale. Like how they did at the start? Another plot point that was handled very poorly is how Isaac's father and Jenna's parents are actually still alive. This is why Jenna is desperate to light the lighthouses. Doing so will save the village of Prox and in turn save their parents, who are imprisoned there. This could have been a cool twist that would strongly bolster the argument for their actions. However, it's never once hinted at during the entirety of the first game. In fact, the text scroll at the start of the Lost Age explicitly says that they are dead, 15 minutes before the game just casually mentions that they are alive. No build-up, no foreshadowing, just Jenna saying it as if this was information that the player was supposed to already know. The way it's presented doesn't come off as a case of unreliable or misleading narrator. It comes off as a nespool. If this was a minor plot point, then I wouldn't be so insistent about it. But we're talking about the main motivation behind the second group of protagonists. I feel that these issues could have been alleviated with more screen time for the other party in both games, so that these oddities would be elaborated on. More scenes that showed what Felix's group and the Fire Clan were doing in the first game, and what Isaac's group was doing in the second. Actually, this whole protagonist switcheroo is rather messed up in general. It's difficult for the player to accept Isaac's newfound personality, as barren as it is, to be the one that he always had, especially given that the dialogue choices give you multiple opportunities to be a goofball. Felix goes through the reverse process, where he has a set personality in the first game due to the things he experienced after the incident at the start, but in the second game becomes silent outside of the post-credits epilogue and one random why. Bobby also randomly dies off-screen with no fanfare or impact, and Sheba's introduction is completely missable. Unless you visit the room in Bobby's palace where she is being held, you will have no idea who she is, why she is up in the Venus Lighthouse with Felix's group, and why she's even important in the first place. So, is the gameplay good? Mostly yes. As a turn-based JRPG, Golden Sun follows many of the genre's usual trappings. You have this world with many locations full of NPCs, and you have random encounters along the way that earn your party experience points and gold to buy items and equipment. Combat's quick and snappy too, with the visual effects doing a great job at conveying the impact of each strike, like the giant piss-off sword. The only different thing to note is that the game doesn't redirect your attacks if an enemy dies in the meantime, but at least your turn isn't totally wasted since it automatically sets the character into the defend option, which halves damage inflicted on them. The devs made sure that dungeons weren't just walks from point A to point B, and filled them with various challenges that required turning on your brain for a moment. These frequently necessitate the usage of synergy in one way or another. That said, I'm not sure I'd actually describe a good chunk of them as puzzles, since they just require using the designated synergy at the right place. They don't involve inventive stuff that forces you to think outside the box, like, say, Lufia 2. But in general, they do just enough to make the players stop and think for a moment, instead of focusing exclusively on random battles that are universally piss easy. Plus, any game that I can happily compare to Lufia 2 is probably doing something right. The combat system's big claim to fame is the Djinn, little critters that do double duty as special attacks and as the game's class system. Djinn are hidden throughout the world, and after talking to them, or beating them up and setting them on fire, they can be set to your party members. Just doing this provides a tiny stat bonus, but that's not the important part. Certain combinations will change the character's class, shifting their stats and usable synergy. There's quite a lot of combinations, and you can stack multiples of the same element to evolve the class into its next tier, further boosting stats and sometimes unlocking more synergy. The Lost Age also adds 3 unique class items, which provide classes that can't be obtained with just Djinn. The twist is that Djinn themselves can be unleashed in battle to provide special effects, which then reverts them to standby. This means that the Djinn's effects won't be active anymore, but while on standby, they can be combined to cast summons, which are extremely powerful and capable of annihilating regular enemies in a flash. After using a summon, the Jinn utilized will have to rest for a number of turns, after which they will be set to their respective character once more. In short, set them to provide stat and class bonuses, unleash them in battle to leave them in standby, and then use them to deal massive damage. There's an element of risk versus reward here, since you have to temporarily cripple your characters in order to utilize your strongest attacks. You also can't just dump all of them on a single character. They must be evenly distributed among the entire party. I love this kind of customizable class system, and it's potentially very interesting to play around with. Shame that the game does absolutely nothing to incentivize players to engage with the mechanics, since the default classes give you all the utility you could ever need. Mia is a good example, because she learns the Wish synergy when she's equipped with at least 4 Mercury Jinn, and at least in the first game you don't want to change that because Wish is the only party healing synergy available to the player. So there goes 25% of your options. Isaac, Felix and Pierce have single target heals and good offensive nukes. Garrett has attack and defense buffs and packs good offensive synergy. Ivan and Sheba are super fast and have tons of powerful damage dealers, while Jenna has a mix of offensive and healing options. But above all else, every party member has access to multi-target synergy that they can spam in random encounters, and you'll quickly notice that half of them are practically clones of each other. Isaac and Felix have identical synergy lists and very similar stats and equipable items. It's the same with Ivan and Sheba, who are basically interchangeable. Mia and Pierce do share a lot of synergy, but are clearly built for different roles. Mia has weaker physical stats, while Pierce is tanky and has a strong single-target attack. Similar story with Garrett and Jenna, with the former being all about dealing damage, while the latter switches between damage or support depending on the situation. Yes, there are some extremely powerful combinations, and summons can be spammed from the start by setting all your Jinn to standby. But by its very nature, these strategies only mostly apply to the late game, when you already pack more than enough nukage to blow anything to smithereens. They're overkill, wholly unnecessary. The games aren't difficult to begin with, and aside from maybe 3 or 4 potential stumbling blocks, you never need to optimize your party to overcome a hard boss. Not that you'll see the full potential of each class without grinding hard anyway, especially in the first game. Characters learn synergy all the way to the 50s, but I've never once gotten past level 30 during the story. The Lost Age also tried to slap a band-aid on summon spam by having endgame bosses utilize moves that cripple your Jinn, but that seems like another own goal for the class system. It's silly how you can't rely on one of the game's selling points because all the trickery you set up goes up in flames the moment you randomly get slapped with Jinn Storm. And then you get blown up by Cruel Ruin. Very funny. Still, on the whole, Golden Sun is very well polished in most immediately apparent areas. It's pretty, the music is awesome, and the first game is what can be called frictionless. It never feels like you don't know where to go or what to do, and the low difficulty means that you're always making progress. It's a well-greased experience. In the Lost Age though, the grease is covering a large dose of superglue that makes progression really test your patience. Some sections seem to have been designed to artificially waste your time. You've got these platforming sections that deliberately force you to take the longest route, and constantly having to watch certain animations adds up over time. Again, this is more of an issue with the last stage than it is the first game. The puzzles aren't as big, and there isn't anywhere near as much backtracking or aimlessly wandering until you find the order the game wants you to do certain things in. Or most likely until you jump on GameFAQs and look for a guide. Ayers Rock is frequently mentioned as the worst thing ever, since it's very long for a dungeon you explore just a few hours into the game. But in retrospect, that's pretty low on the lobotomy scale compared to the 10 out of 10 that is the fetch quest for the Trident. This is the absolute lowest point of the games, lasting for hours and sending you all over the place with little guidance to help you in-game. You finally get a ship, and you think you'll be set loose on a grand open world to explore. But in reality, there isn't that much to truly explore. Several paths are conveniently blocked, and the first game's areas are inaccessible anyway, so curb your excitement. You also sort of get an airship near the end, but it's frustratingly limited. It can't actually fly, just barely hovers, so you can cross a few specific obstacles and make backtracking slightly less annoying. And since there's no synergy that teleports you to any town you've visited, exploring every part of the world and tying up loose ends does involve a lot of backtracking. The games also come packed with classic JRPG frustrations, like some Jin being permanently missable, which is another reason why I recommend using a guide. Did I mention that some of them are hidden in very specific patches of land for no discernible reason? And that you can't acquire every single Jin in the last stage without transferring your data when starting a new game? Golden Sun is death by 1,000 cuts. The package in its entirety is enjoyable, great even in some respects. But the more time you spend on it, the more you can poke holes everywhere. Many scenes are strong when you're in the moment, but fall apart when you try to think of the cohesive whole. I said at the start of the video that there has to be a reason why I struggle to finish the games. And yeah, that's almost entirely because I dread playing through the boring bits of the last stage. If both of these games were originally planned as a single game, I dread to think how bloated that would have been. But then again, some of that might just be my own lack of perspective. Remember, the last stage wasn't initially playable straight after the first game. Even in Japan, where the time between the release dates was just months, a second game that retreads a lot of ground would feel a lot fresher. Meanwhile, some dingus on YouTube decides to play the last stage straight after finishing the first game. While it's not something I'd consider a must-play, I still think Golden Sun is worth looking into for any JRPG fan. It's stuck with some people for very valid reasons, whether it be the charming world, the aesthetics and music, or the gameplay. So go ahead, give it a try, and you might just find the sun shining down on you.